Senate will come to order for this Friday, April 2nd. Roll call, please.
Roll call on legislative day number 32, Friday, April 2nd. Anderson? Here. Baldwin? Right here. Lightman? Here. Boner?
Excused.
Excused. Bouchard? Here. Case? Right. Cooper? Here. Driscoll? Here. Ellis? French? Here. Burpee? Here. Guru? Hicks? Here. Hutchings? Here. James? Here. Kinski? Here. Kolb? Here. Cost? Landon? Here. McEwen? Here. Nethercott? Pappas? Here. Perkins? Here. Rothfuss? Here. Guru? Here. Salazar? Here. Schuler? Scott? Here. Steinmetz? Wasserberger? Here. Cost? Here. President Dockstader?
Here. Heard by Senator Steinmetz. Heard by Senator Steinmetz. Please, yes. Thank you.
Would you bow with me in prayer? Father God, we thank you that we are here today on planet Earth in your service, and we thank you that you have called each one of us as elected officials into this position to represent our constituents and to do the work of the state of Wyoming. We thank you for giving us the strength to endure through this session, for getting us a long way through this coronavirus pandemic, for the health that we have enjoyed throughout this legislative session, and for the friendships we've forged and the people we've learned to work with and adore as we do this work on the state on behalf of the citizens of the state of Wyoming. We thank you for our governor and our secretary of state, our superintendent of public instruction, and our state treasurer. Would you bless them as they do the work that we have put forward in legislation? Father God, as we come through the rest of these days, help us to continue and finish strong. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen. Senator Ellis, would you start us in the pledge?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Senator Ellis,
Mr. President, may I have privilege of the floor?
please do.
During our prayer, I think we omitted a prayer for our state auditor. So I just wanted her to know as well that she is in our prayers too. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Today in Wyoming history, I found this story interesting, folks. Cattlemen of the Bighorn Basin dominated the range for many years and set up boundaries or deadlines where sheep were forbidden. Fierce animosity grew between the opposing sheep and cattle ranchers as several sheep camps were raided during the late 1800s and early 1900s. In late March 1909, Joe Allemand, a French sheepman, Joe Emge, a cattleman turned sheepman, and three others left Warland, headed for Spring Creek with 5,000 head of sheep. Talk spread like wildfire across the western slope of the Bighorn Mountains as the deadline was crossed, and plans were soon made to head off this intrusion. On a moonlit night of April 2nd, 1909, 7 masked riders approached the sheep camp's 2 wagons where the herders slept. Gunfire lit the night as rifles blazed. Emge and Allemand and party were killed, and the wagons were set on fire. 5 of the perpetrators were convicted and sent to prison. Public reaction against this brutal and tragic act left no doubt that violence in Wyoming's open range would no longer be tolerated. Interesting, pivotal point. Quote for the day: No matter how long the winter, spring is sure to follow. Proverb. Session status, today is the last day for bills on second reading in the second house. Senator Hicks. You're on. It shows it, you're all lit up here.
It's not working, Mr.
There you,
President.
it is, promise you.
There we go. Regarding your last statement about that animosity on the range, apparently that telegraph didn't make it to Carbon County.
It's a little animosity.
There's still a little animosity down there between some of our sheep and cattle folks. So
I'm sure you're a good senator. You'll be able to work that out with them. Ooh. Oh, Senator Cooper.
I'd like to add to your story just a little bit. If you look out here on the wall, there's a gentleman hanging up there from the 1909 legislature. His name was George Bear McClellan. He was our senator.
Say the
And
name again,
at the-
please. Say the name again.
I'm sorry,
George, say it again.
George Bear.
Okay.
Just to say George B up there. He had a place south of Tin Sleep, about 20 miles, beautiful place. And that's where the cattlemen gathered up, was at his ranch before they started up to or down the creek. But he was, of course, down here, so he was absolutely hands off. He was innocent of the affair, but that's where they gathered.
All right.
Thank you.
I like to hear these pieces of history. Thank you. All right. Favorite part, signing when enrolled acts. We're at that order of business, signing when enrolled acts. Enrolled Act number 66, bill number 229, reader.
House Enrolled Act number 66 being original House Bill 229. An act relating to agriculture, livestock, and other animals.
I'm about to sign House Enrolled Act number 66, the same being original House Bill 229. So signed. House Enrolled Act number 67.
House Enrolled Act number 67 being original House Bill 207, an act relating to the administration of government.
I'm about to sign House Enrolled Act number 67, being original House Bill 207. So signed. House Enrolled Act 68.
House Enrolled Act number 68 being original House Bill 17, an act relating to the military department.
I'm about to sign House Enrolled Act number 68, the same being House Bill 17. So signed. House Enrolled Act 69.
House Enrolled Act number 69 being original House Bill 49, an act relating to agency fees.
I'm about to sign House Enrolled Act number 69, the same being original House Bill 49. So signed. House Enrolled Act number 70.
House Enrolled Act number 70 being original House Bill 116, an act relating to concealed weapons.
I'm about to sign House Enrolled Act number 70, the same being original House Bill 116, 116. So signed. House Enrolled Act number 71.
House Enrolled Act number 71 being original House Bill 188, an act relating to intergovernmental cooperation.
I'm about to sign House Enrolled Act number 71, the same being House Bill 188. I have so signed. House Enrolled Act number 72.
House Enrolled Act number 72 being original House Bill 75, an act relating to elections.
I'm about to sign House Enrolled Act number 72, the same being House Bill 75. So signed. House Joint Resolution 9.
House Enrolled Joint Resolution number 2 being original House Joint Resolution 9, a joint resolution proposing to amend the Wyoming Constitution to allow local government entities to invest in stocks and equities upon a 2/3 vote of both houses of the legislature.
About signed enrolled joint resolution number 2, the same being joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 9. Signed. Enrolled Act number 47.
Senate Enrolled Act number 47 being original Senate File 83, an act relating to community college districts.
I'm about to sign Senate Enrolled Act number 47, the same being Senate File 83. So signed. Enrolled Act number 48, Senate.
Senate Enrolled Act number 48 being original Senate File 102, an act relating to cooperative utilities.
I'm about to sign Senate Enrolled Act number 48, the same being Senate File 102. I've so signed. House Enrolled Act number 49.
Senate Enrolled Act.
Excuse me, Senate Enrolled Act, go ahead.
Senate Enrolled Act number 49 being original Senate File 136, an act relating to public utilities.
I'm about to sign Senate Enrolled Act number 49, the same being Senate File 136. Signed. Senate Enrolled Act number 50.
Senate Enrolled Act number 50 being original Senate File 96, an act relating to crimes and offenses.
I'm about to sign Senate Enrolled Act number 50, the same being Senate File 96. I have so signed. Senate Enrolled Act number 51.
Senate Enrolled Act number 51 being original Senate File 78, an act relating to real estate appraisers.
I'm about to sign Senate Enrolled Act number 51, the same being Senate File, being the same original Senate File 78. So signed. Senate Enrolled Act number 52.
Senate Enrolled Act number 52 being original Senate File 126, an act relating to planning and zoning.
I'm about to sign Senate Enrolled Act number 52, the same being original Senate File 126. So signed. Senate Enrolled Act number 53.
Senate Enrolled Act number 53 being original Senate File 139, an act relating to community-based in-home services.
I'm about to sign Senate Enrolled Act number 53, the same being original Senate File 139. Signed. Senate Enrolled Act number 54.
Senate Enrolled Act number 54 being original Senate File 114, an act relating to state lands.
I'm about to sign Senate Enrolled Act number 54, the same being original Senate File 114. That's so signed. Senate Enrolled Act number 55.
Senate Enrolled Act number 55 being original Senate File 111, an act relating to the University of Wyoming.
I'm about to sign Senate Enrolled Act number 55, the same being original Senate File 111. I have so signed. Senate Enrolled Act number 56.
Senate Enrolled Act number 56 being original Senate File 66, an act relating to wills, decedents' estates, and a probate code.
I'm about to sign Senate Enrolled Act number 56, the same being original Senate File 66. So signed. Senate Enrolled Act number 57.
Senate Enrolled Act number 57 being original Senate File 19, an act relating to public health and safety.
I'm about to sign Senate Enrolled Act number 57, the same being original Senate File 19. So signed. Senate Enrolled Act number 58.
Senate Enrolled Act number 58 being original Senate File 2, an act relating to K-12 school facilities.
I'm about to sign Senate Enrolled Act number 58, same being original Senate File 2. So signed. Enrolled Joint Resolution number 1.
Senate Enrolled Joint Resolution number 1 being original Senate Joint Resolution 3,
I'm
a
about,
joint resolution requesting Congress and the federal government to reverse federal orders and actions that inhibit the safe development of oil and gas in Wyoming and that negatively and disproportionately impact Wyoming citizens and industries.
I'm about to sign Enrolled Joint Resolution number 1, same being Joint Resolution number 3, Senate Joint Resolution number 3. I have so signed. Concurrences, conference reports. Senator Scott, are you ready for? Senator Scott, are you ready for concurrence on Senate File 58?
Yes, Mr. President, if we could have that ready.
Please read it in.
One moment.
Senator Kinski.
Could you repeat again? Because I only find one report up on the front table. Which one is it?
Senate File 58. 58.
Okay, that's not up on the front table. Will it be
Let's just wait for just a moment, folks.
Senate File 58? Did you say,
Correct,
Mr. President?
correct. We'll just wait for just a moment, make sure everybody has the proper paperwork. Thank you for your patience, Senator Scott.
Mr. President, it just seems a bit unusual that I've got to look up on my computer a conference report from Senator Scott.
Interesting observation while we wait. Anyone else need one copy? Okay, we'll proceed then.
Message number 319, referencing Senate File number 58, Wyoming investment in nursing funding.
Senator Scott.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate do concur with House amendments to Senate File 58, reference message number 319. And I ask you to vote aye. Mr. President, this was a joint interim education bill that was seeking to use CARES Act funding for the Wyoming investment in nursing program, longstanding program that we put in. I think it may have been actually sponsored by Committee 10. And I remember that John Schiffer was chairman of the Appropriations Committee when we did it. So that takes it back 20, 25 years, something like that. And what we were trying to do with the bill, what the Joint Committee was trying to do with the bill was bring the funding back to where it had been using the CARES Act funding. It was aimed at a special session that never happened. They carried it forward to the general session. We in the Senate committee modified the language to apply for what was left of the CARES Act funding. And what the House has done has put in the standard language that I believe the Appropriations Committee developed, Mr. President, for all these things. And they'll sort out probably in the planned summer special session, we'll sort it out to equitable distribution of what's left over. So this is consistent with the other bills of this nature. And for that reason, I urge that the Senate do concur.
Discussion or questions for Senator Scott? All right, we'll proceed then. Motion is the Senate do concur on Senate File 58 and vote aye. Chief Clerk will call the roll. Got the Chief Clerk running this morning. She's doing great. Go ahead.
Senate File 58 concurrence request. Roll call. Anderson.
Aye.
Aye. Baldwin.
Aye.
Aye. Beitman. Aye. Boner excused. Bouchard. No. Case. Aye. Cooper. Aye. Driscoll. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. Aye. Murphy. Aye. Guru. Aye. Hicks. Aye. Hutchings. Aye. James. No. Kinsky. Aye. Cole.
Aye.
Aye. Cost. Aye. Landon. Aye. McEwen. Aye. Nethercott. Aye. Pappas. Aye. Perkins. Aye. Rothfuss. Aye. Salazar. Aye. Schuler. Aye. Scott.
Aye.
Aye. Steinmetz. Aye. Wasserberger. Aye. President Dockstader. Aye. Closing vote. Closing vote closed. Senate File 58, 27 aye, 2 no, 1 excused.
By your vote, you have concurred on Senate File 58. Joint Conference Committee report. Senator Cost, are you ready on Joint Conference Committee report on Senate File 87? Joint Conference number 1, Senator Cost.
I am ready.
Read it in, please.
House Message number 347, referencing Senate File 87.
Go ahead and move it, Senator Cost.
I would move that I would move the adoption of Joint Conference Committee report. Got to get the right number here. 347 to Senate File 87 voyeurism amendments and ask for an aye vote. Ladies and gentlemen, what we've done here, actually, I will take credit for the work of 2 good people on my committee to get things straightened out correctly. They did a good job. We removed the things that were giving some constitutional angst, and the other amendments that they had approved, we felt were good for the voyeurism bill. Amendment, the House Amendment 001 in the Standing Committee was approved, which basically on page 3, line 6, after recording, inserted live streaming, because that's something we have to face in the world we live in right now. On page 3, line 20, deleted the less than 5 years and inserted no more than 10 years, which is more appropriate wording for that legally. Page 3, line 21, if a person is sentenced under subsection A of this section is placed on probation, the court may, notwithstanding any other provisions of law, impose a term of probation exceeding the maximum imprisonment of 6 months, provided the term of probation, including extension, shall not be exceeding 1 year. That line 4, page 4, line 1, deleted the E and deleted D and insert E. And after N subsection A or B of was inserted. Page 4, line 3, after under, corrected it with subsection A or B of this, and then page 4, lines 9 through 21 was deleted entirely because it's not needed. Page 5, lines 1 through 4 was deleted entirely. Page 5, line 21 was to delete July 1st and insert immediately upon completion of all acts necessary for a bill to become law as provided by Article 4, Section 8 of the Wyoming Constitution. The other two that were also approved was on page 2, line 22, to strike 2 and insert 5 because 2 is just not an appropriate number. You've got to have something more than 2. And page 3, line 14, insert and renumber as necessary. A minor convicted of violating subsection B of this section shall be guilty of a status offense as defined in Wyoming Statute 71107B, Romanet 3, and may be fined not more than $250. So that takes the minor to a fine of $250 for this act. And that was approved. Down below that line, page 4, line 1, after person who is 18 years of age or older, and page 4, line 2, convicted as an adult, and everything else is as it was when it came out of the Senate. So I would ask for your aye vote. I would answer any questions somebody may have.
All right, further discussion or questions? Further discussion? Oh, Senator Scott, thank you. Go ahead.
Mr. President, am I following this correctly, that the net result is there's no new felony in this bill? Is that a correct understanding of what we're doing here?
Do we have any more questions before we go back to the sponsor? Let's go back to you, Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. President. The felony that was approved out of the Senate is still in here. And that was approved out of the Senate.
Okay.
You had a felony in there.
Any further questions or follow-up? Senator Rothfuss? Oh, okay, yeah. All right. The motion is the Senate adopt, referencing message number 347, Senate file 87. Motion is the Senate adopt the Joint Conference Committee report for Senate file 87 and vote aye. The chief clerk will call the roll.
Roll call on Joint Conference Committee number 1. Report to Senate File 87. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner, excused. Bouchard? No. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. James? No. Kinsky? Aye. Kolb? Aye. Cost? Aye. Landon? Aye. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Perkins? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? No. Steinmetz? Aye. Wasserberger? Aye. President Dockstader? Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 87, 24 aye, 5 no, 1 excused.
By your vote, you voted to adopt Joint Conference Report number 1 on Senate File 87. For Senate File 75, those serving as conferees, Senate File 87, Joint Conference number 1, Landon Chair, Nethercott, and Cole. Let's do this, catch up on some amendments coming in for second readings. If I could call upon the chairman of appropriations. We've got the report back from the governor regarding the budget. So let's just take a moment while we collect these amendments and so forth and turn some time over to our appropriations committee and Chairman Perkins to talk about the governor's response to the budget. Go ahead, Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yesterday, the governor came back with his the veto message for the budget bill. And when bills have appropriations, the governor has a line item veto authority. And so he exercised that. I would point out, because it will become relevant on the very last let's see, where was it on? Anyway, he makes a reference in here about in section 3 that there's a little April Fool's joke in here, since the letter was on April. Of course, we'll point that out to you when we get there. We'll just take note of it. Mr. President, members of the Senate, the probably easiest way to do that, if you have that letter, is to go to the back pages where we just have the actual line item vetoes. And if, Mr. President, with your permission, I'll just run through those really quick.
Please do.
So the first one should be on your page. If you look at line 9, and this was in, excuse me, on page 9. So we're looking at the attachments to the letter. And do you not have those? Well, we can go through these we'll do these in the letter then. So if you look at the first thing that he has in here, which is section 006. It's on page 2 of the letter. As he talks in here, section 006, administration information, footnote 4. What footnote 4 did is that it was interesting. It's interesting and a little bit of creative use of it, but it's kind of hard to understand. But ultimately, there was a restriction on A&I about using and limiting the use of money for state leasing, and the state leasing for the state. As most of you know, the state leases properties over mostly office space and some weather space around the state, primarily here in Cheyenne, but all over the state. And so they've been working at consolidating and reducing the lease effects. It's one of the things and one of the benefits of, if there is I wouldn't benefit, but a byproduct of all the virtual attendance and during the pandemic was we found a lot of people could be just as productive, and we didn't need to have as much office space. And so as a part of the budget reductions, the governor's office and A&I have been working on those things. And ultimately his message simply says, hey, we don't need you to put a specific amount in here. We're working at that. We anticipate that we'll continue to cut or reduce our leasing budget by 28% by the end of the biennium. And so he just struck out some language there where we had reduced or required or limited the amount that could be used for leasing. Ultimately, he thinks pursuant to his letter, he thinks he'll beat that mark, but he didn't want us setting specific or hard lines in the budget for him to do that. There's certainly nothing wrong with him doing that, and there's certainly nothing wrong with the Senate if we felt strong enough about that to vote to override that particular veto. The next couple he had to do are related. So if you look at the section 7 Wyoming Military Department footnote, and the part and also section 24 State Parks and Cultural Resources, these were budget footnotes that were in an amendment that was adopted by the House. And ultimately what the budget footnote did was it reserved $150,000 appropriated for the operation and administration of the Veterans Museum, which is a little museum in in the Casper Airport, which used to be the Casper Air Base during World War II. And so that was fine. But what the governor struck was some language that said in the footnote that said no funds of this appropriation shall be expended unless the Wyoming Military Department enters into a memorandum of understanding with the museum in Casper, Wyoming. He also struck language saying that it is the intent of the legislature that this appropriation not be included in the military department standard budget for the immediately succeeding fiscal biennium, and that the military department submit an exception request for the operation and administration of the Wyoming Veterans Memorial Museum for the immediately succeeding fiscal biennium. And then he went down and lined out. So anyway, that's what he mostly did in that. Mr. Chairman, the governor and Mr. President, the governor's always maintained and tried to protect where he thinks there's an overreach from the legislature into the powers of the executive under separation of powers concepts. And as he explains there, he thinks we're just being too prescriptive with respect to the powers that inherently reside in the executive, which is we have the right to appropriate. We don't necessarily, unless we do it in a separate bill, have the right to demand or require MOUs. And his basis of that is under the Constitution, and that's the general, one of the exceptions to the single subject rule of the Constitution is bills of a general appropriation, which are contained only general appropriations. And that's one of the reasons why there's a general prohibition or caution about trying to legislate in the budget. And that's what he believes we were doing there. And that's why he lined it out. That goes on. It also, so that takes care of the lineouts of footnote 8. And then in 8, there's just it's the other side. You went to from the military department, then you go to the other side, and we had there was similar language from an amendment that was, or what was in the bill, which was footnote 8, which is the other half about with respect to parks and cultural resources, striking out the same language about MOUs and the transfer of this museum and who's going to do what with the museum when it gets there. It's not that the legislature can't do that, but it's hard to do that in a general budget bill from the governor's perspective that is supposed to contain only the general appropriations of the state. So that, I think that gets us all the way through. That gets us through those two. We go to section 27, where we talk about and what is here is the footnote that was stricken says it is the intent of the legislature within state construction departments, a budget request for the immediately succeeding fiscal biennium. The department shall include a justification and performance assessment of position 27, including the position's contribution to the state construction projects. Again, you might could do that in a bill, but the governor has staked out the ground that that's inappropriate in a budget bill that should contain only general appropriations. And quite frankly, certainly the legislature has the right to get that information, but it's required in a budget bill is a little bit of a different issue. Mr. President, he also struck out no, never mind. That one was then the next one had to do with the Wyoming Business Council, and what it was there was a House amendment that was adopted that tried to make sure that certain money that there was like $35,000 that was to be used for the Wyoming's Council on Women's Issues. And there was the same type of language. You're going to require one department to hold the money and another department to administer that council, and required an MOU, a memorandum of understanding between them, and got pretty prescriptive in that. And the governor again thought that was an inappropriate use of the budget. We get too prescriptive and have too many, we go beyond just putting a condition on appropriation. Struck that. The next one down is also with the Wyoming Business Council, is the other half of that between the Department of Workforce Services and the Department of Business Council on the same $35,000 appropriation and the prescriptive nature of how it's to be managed and who's to hold it and who's to administer it. That takes us down to the section 2006 on the Department of Education footnote, and the Department of Education footnote, he struck a footnote 2, which what the footnote said was the total of this appropriation of $136,000, almost $137,000 is appropriated for one at-will employee contract position filled by the State Board of Education for the period beginning July 1st, 2021 and ending June 30th, 2022. And this appropriation shall not be transferred or expended for any other purpose. There's nothing wrong, particularly with that last sentence, but of course you see the governor's opinion is which we have the right to control full-time equivalent positions, but there's a question about whether we can control at-will positions. And his point is, if I wanted to hire one and split the money, as long as they don't exceed the appropriation and hiring at-will positions, I'm free to do that. Again, I think it's more of a matter of a principle as a form of substance on this, but ultimately that's that budget. Then the next one really in section 3 is his, where he talks about careful inspection of the vetoed portion of this section seems essential, especially appropriate on April 1st. This is a veto conforming to the veto I made on section 300 requires an especially artful and careful, if clever, use of red ink. What he did, and this was essentially is and a little bit of an April Fool's joke, a little bit of legislative or intragovernmental branch humor, I guess you could say. What he did is in section 3 of the budget bill, he did a line item veto where he crossed out the bottom of the letter P that hangs down, and he crossed it out, and so it became an O. And so it is the effect of that has zero consequence in the bill. It has zero anything. I think is a little bit of humor, but we'll just note that in that we'll just take note of it and for the record here, Mr. President, that he can't use his line item veto to change a word or to change a letter. He can use it to strike out. We would always maintain that position. So we'll note it. It's certainly, I don't think it, but it was an attempt, a little bit of humor. It would be a little bit over, it would be a little overreach of us to retaliate with the veto override on what was intended to be a little bit of lightheartedness. But we'll just take note of that we believe and I think the legislature would stand very strongly if there's any substantive nature of that would be an inappropriate use of the line item veto. Finally, then one of the most substance is that the last one he did was a funds transfer. And if you remember that he had taken that there was a sub account in the SIPA that held $30,500,000 for construction towards a future construction of a new penitentiary or other facility for the Department of Corrections. We had taken and the House had agreed that we would take that money. We put half of it into the principal of the Common School Permanent Land Fund and half of it into the principal of the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund. We did that with this, plus we did it with another 128 million and change for the 1% severance tax. But with respect to this amount of the Wyoming State Penitentiary Capital Construction Account, he struck that. So it would not go to principal. It would be held. And depending on what happens with other legislation, it'll either end up remaining in the SIPA account, the Strategic Investments and Projects account, or depending on other legislation, it may end up in the LSRA. The governor did talk to me for just a minute about that yesterday. His concern with that was that he thinks that there will be, he doesn't have it now, but he's concerned that there will be a significant capital repair or maintenance problem at one of the state's penal facilities. And he would like to keep that money handy because he thinks he might need that in the next several years if we have some kind of catastrophic or major issue at one of the penitentiary or prisons or camps, and that may require substantial investment to make that right. So he was doing that in his mind out of a budget of caution, but it still does allow almost 129 million from the 1% severance tax account to continue on and be deposited to the principal as per other provisions of the budget that were not vetoed. So that's the explanation. Having gone through those and visited with some of our staff attorneys, some of those, if we were to veto those, the governor could probably challenge us in court and win on a number of those. Some of those I think we'd be purely within our right to override them, and it would be very much the executive could do about it. Mr. President, that is the prerogative of the legislature and the executive branches. Of course, Mr. President, I would just remind the body that since it's a House bill, any vetoes would start in the House, and they would not be available for us to consider unless or until 2/3 had vetoed to override one of these things out of the other House. So there's not much for us to do right now, but see what happens down at the other end of the building as the day progresses, Mr. President.
We have a little time if you'd like to follow up with any questions regarding this for the Chairman of Appropriations. Any questions? All right. Senator Kinski.
Thank you. I perked right up when the chairman said there's not much for us to do right now. But I do actually have I guess a comment and perhaps a question. This $30 million on the prison, getting that to go into Corpus, I thought was a pretty significant milestone. You remember last session, we left here without a CapCon budget because we were wrestling over an amount about $28 million on whether it was going to go to the West Stands or a new pool. And there's been just a complete turnaround to where our colleagues joined with us in saying, we're going to take money off the table for spending and we're going to put it into Corpus for future generations. And so, Mr. Appropriations Chair, you might give us, I mean, does the governor anticipate they're going to need $30 million worth of repairs as yet unspecified at the prison? And then a comment on a little bit more about whether it's going to stay in SIPA where it can be profiled for spending, whether at the prison or somewhere else by the governor's office, or whether it's go to LISRA where it can't be profiled. And then it's up to us to determine what to do with it. If we do nothing, it's going to stay there in SIPA, I take it, until we come back next year. And if we move it to LISRA, just a little bit more background on it, because I was really heartened by getting that money into Corpus, and I'm disheartened to see it not go to Corpus. And I'm really ruminating on the prospect of overriding, Mr. President. Thank you.
Any further questions before we go back to the Chairman of Appropriations? Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I don't disagree with anything that the good Vice Chair of Appropriations said. To answer the question specifically, the $30,500,000 in the penitentiary construction fund is a sub account under the strategic projects and investments account. And so if by striking it out, I mean, obviously the governor can only line out. I mean, the court cases that where the legislation, the governor have gone back and forth on line item veto says basically that Supreme Court has said the governor can put his pen down and start writing. He can lift it whenever he or she wants to lift the pen, and that's the line item veto. And so, he can't, cross out and say he would like to send 15,000 or 250. He can't say, there's no way for him to send half of that amount to one of the funds using the line item veto. And so it was kind of all or nothing with him. But I shared with you kind of his musings about yesterday morning. He was trying to come down a couple of final decisions that he did call down. We talked about a couple of things. That was one of them we talked about specifically, and that was his concern. So it was kind of binary with him. It had to be all of that amount or nothing. Heartened that no one, that we got. I'm certainly very heartened that we got the almost $129 million from the 1% severance tax to be deposited. With respect to to what the other side has, we this morning met very informally with staff attorneys. The vice president was at that meeting, as was both some representatives of budget and fiscal and the director of LSO when we kind of went through those things. And the speaker indicated he was doubtful whether or not that there would be enough 2/3 to override that particular veto. But we'll see. I mean, ultimately, we don't get to take that up for consideration override unless or until the House does that. If the House were to send that down here, we could certainly take it up and consider it. But unless or until they do that, there's no action for this body to take. We wait and see. We only take up the veto overrides to the extent that those veto overrides happen in the House and then come down here, and then we would take those up. It's not been particularly. It depends also whether in some instances, there's been some years where the budget has raised revenue. And of course, any bill that starts revenue has to start in the House. But generally this thing about which body goes first alternates, but sometimes that's affected by specific provisions in the budget bill that would require it to be a House bill instead of a Senate file. But in this case, it was the House Bill 1 that was taken up. And so the opportunity to take the first run at overrides rests in the House because it was House Bill 1 and not Senate File 1 this year. We would anticipate, unless there's revenue raising measures in the budget next year, that would be a Senate file. And so the opportunity for budget overrides would begin in this body for the biennial budget next year. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Any further questions or discussion? All right. Thank you for that presentation, Chairman Perkins. We'll be dealing with that a little later as the House takes care of their part. Folks, we're going to move into second reading, and just to give you a little advance warning, what we're going to try to do while we have everybody in town, we're going to go through second and thirds before lunch. And then the seconds that we take care of before lunch, we're going to come back after lunch and move those into thirds. So if you need amendments prepared, that gives you the lunch hour to do that. But it also allows us to coordinate with the House. They're doing the same thing. And so we'll come back again, the seconds that we're dealing with now, they will become the thirds after lunch.
Gotta have 2/3.
Get your, and we will call on you to suspend the rules. That allows us to sync up with the House. And it also allows us to work with the larger part of the body that's here this week. While what I'm starting to hear, a growing number will be on Zoom next week. Okay, with that, let's go to second readings. House Bill 51, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 51, meat processing programs.
There are no amendments. House Bill 51 having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 92, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 92, revisers bill.
There are no amendments. House Bill 92 having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 127, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 127, public health amendments.
There are no amendments. Having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Oh, there is. Go ahead, Senator McEwen, just holler out at me.
Mr. President, it's a very short amendment. It's line 5 or page 5, line 23.
Let's have it read in.
Could we have it read in, please?
Does he have it? There's a second reading amendment on 127, making sure that we've got it here, Senator. I'm not showing it on my list. Give us folks, just a few minutes.
Okay, it's long.
No, the other day when he was saying Schuler, I was laughing because it rhymes.
Okay, Senator, we're gonna put 127 down at the bottom of second readings, and we'll have that amendment out for you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yep. Let me just make a note here. House Bill 136, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 136, inclusive ballot language.
There is an amendment. Please read in the amendment.
House Bill 136, second reading amendment number 1 to engrossed copy, page 2, line 4, delete.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move second reading amendment number one to House Bill 136 and would ask the body to vote aye. This amendment would get rid of the possessive language in the ballot language, so it would make clear that if you wanted to put someone's name in as an alternative candidate, you would be writing the person's name. That's the amendment. Please vote aye.
Question being called. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The amendment has passed. That is second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 136. We're back on 136. 136 having been read two separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 158, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 158, local land use planning and zoning.
There are no amendments. House Bill 158 having, well, not on my list, but I'll take your word for it. There it is. Okay. And it says Senator Perkins. Go ahead, Senator Perkins.
That's all I knew there was an amendment, Mr. President. Mr. President, we had that read in yet?
Go ahead and read in the amendment.
House Bill 158, second reading amendment number 1 to engrossed copy, page 3, lines 13 through 15, delete.
Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What this, let me, a couple words. I would move second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 158 and ask the body to vote aye. What this amendment does, and if you remember back, we've had a couple discussions about zoning and effects of zoning and what it does. And really, when we're talking about, whether we're talking about zoning or land use plans, we're talking about use. We're talking about use. And one of the issues that we have in the bill as it's currently constituted is, in my mind, is on page 11 through, or it's on page 3, lines 11 through 13, which say that nothing in this article shall allow any local government to use a local land use plan as the authority to diminish private property rights or property rights of the state of Wyoming existing under valid zoning regulation or existing in the absence of a valid zoning regulation. Mr. Chairman, that's a great concept, but we've talked before about the diminution of value and how problematic that is when you're talking about zoning in particular. I can tell you that zoning and putting any encumbrance on a property, whether it's from a land use plan, whether it's a utility line, whether it's anything, all of those things have the potential, and in some cases can diminish the value. Let me give you an example of in my community where this actually hinders the ability to do what you really want to do, even for a developer. So in many places you have zoning. So let's say that there's a new zoning application for a land use or that's under zoning law. You can come in, you're going to do a large residential subdivision. And so it's zoned for that. There's no problem with that. But your land use plan, which adopted by, it's a part of the land use plan, you're going to provide for streets. And so maybe when you're adding a large subdivision, the part of the land use plan requires that there be an arterial street that continues up and continues through the subdivision, the other side of the subdivision, and then have connectors and other things that come on. It's very common under the land use plans and these things that you talk about how wide the streets are, and how wide the auxiliary streets are. You set all these parameters, whether you're going to have curb and gutter, you're going to do all those things. Those are not in zoning regulations. Those are in land use plans. And so if you're going to have, I mean, we had a situation where we had when I was a county commissioner, where a developer wanted a sticky subdivision right at the end of an arterial street. And the only thing that would do is the arterial street would provide access, but there was no way for the arterial street to move through the subdivision and come out the other side for future development beyond that. That's an example where simply the zoning and requiring the use of the arterial streets probably removes several housing sites and thereby diminishes the value of that property. Mr. President, you have to be able to zone. You have to be able to have land use plans if you're going to have any kind of orderly development, particularly around growing cities and growing towns. And so what this amendment does is simply comes in, we delete lines 13 through 15 and insert deny or restrict a permissible use, land use, or physical development under zoning regulations. And so what we're doing there, so now this new subparagraph F would read, nothing in this article shall allow any local government to use a local land use plan as authority to deny or restrict a permissible land use or physical development under valid zoning regulations. That's what this amendment would do. It would allow for continued use of traffic plans and if you're going to have parks and schools and things like that, it allows for those types of things to continue to be used. And it's important for particularly cities and towns that are growing to maintain traffic flow and the amenities and the services that people expect and want. And all of those things will have some adverse effect on the value of property, but that's also what will make in some respects the property as value, because you have those amenities, you have that access, you have those streets, you have that sewer, you have that gutter. on all those things. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions and ask for your favorable consideration.
Questions for the sponsor? This is second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 158. Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just briefly, I really don't think that this amendment hampers the bill in any way. But for one clarification, based on the discussion, subdivisions are covered in a whole ever separate section on the statute. So they're not included in the land use planning side. Well, why you can say it's an eligible land use. Subdivision reviews come all the way back to the county commission, even those local conservation districts. That's a whole separate section on the statutes, just to be clear on that. But on the amendment, vote it up, vote it down, as my colleague from Laramie County would say. But I don't think it in any way abridges the intent or conflicts the bill for what it was intended to do.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just rise in support of the amendment. Once again, commend the Senate Appropriations Chairman. He tends to do these things, you know, he goes home and, you know, the next morning, you have a little heartburn of the bill, you're sitting there thinking about it. And the next morning, I always go over and say, well, Senator, what did you fix last night? And, you know, I think he has fixed this one, and I think it's a good amendment, adds to the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Now that he has the budget behind him, he has some discretionary time. All right, Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is usually the part of our, when we come up with these land use planning bills where I stand up and rail about something horrible is happening in my county that's brought this bill, and it's a one-person thing and we can't do this and how bad it is. I stand today, I'm not on April Fool's Day, to tell you that I support the amendment and I support the bill. This is a good bill. It keeps elected officials honest in land use planning. It has them do visioning documents, but then makes them do the supporting documentation and do the regulations that makes law, that makes it better. And that does give owners a clear view of what their rights are and protects them on the bill, on the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Let's go back to the sponsors. Wrap up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Yesterday I had a chance, I kept working this bill after we had talked about it, went through, and I got to tell you, Mr. President, even on the amendment, that first amendment yesterday was a wonderful thing. It really improved the bill. And with this amendment, I think it becomes very workable, and it actually is I think it really pretty darn good piece of legislation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you. Ready for the question? Question is on second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 158. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The amendment has passed. We're back on the bill. For House Bill 158, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 159, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 159, Liquor Manufacturer Regulations.
There are no amendments. House Bill 159, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 163, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 163, Federal Congressional Elections Residency.
There is an amendment. Please read in the amendment.
House Bill 163, second reading amendment number 1, corrected copy, page 2, line 18 after.
Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd move second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 136 and ask the body to vote aye. Mr. President, this bill comes back and does a great thing. It establishes residency requirements for our congressional delegation candidates, that they need to be a resident state of Wyoming, and essentially, and this is a great idea. The problem that we'll have is, as soon as they're elected, particularly if they have families, they're going to move. They're going to make a choice. They have to have some place to live or reside at somewhere around the capital of the United States. And if they have young families, they're going to make that decision. Are you going to educate those kids and have your kids at home? Are you going to have, you're going to have your kids out in Washington, in the Washington DC area or Northern Virginia or Maryland and have a home out in that area. And that's where your kids are going to school. And you make those decisions about where you think you're going to have the most time with your family. As a result of that, you're going to have some incidental benefits that accrue from residency because your job requires you to be in Washington DC a lot. And hopefully we want them there a lot. We want them back here some too, but we want them there because that's where they do a lot of their work. And so what this amendment tries to do is just create this concept that I think was a little too strict, that was happening is we're going to make sure, maybe it's a good way to limit terms because once you're elected and you establish your residence back there, you're going to be in violation of the statute as written. So what this amendment does, it simply comes back in the three places where you have that similar language and where he says you can't have benefits out of any other state, basically other than Wyoming. But just kind of to capture that concept, just say excluding benefits of residency to or incidental from maintaining a residence at or near the United States Capitol. And I note that capital is misspelled, but anyway, I guess I should have looked at that harder before I approved it. But anyway, we can fix that on third reading. But ultimately, and at or near just meaning, ultimately, you're going to live somewhere in the district. You're going to live somewhere in, most likely in Virginia or Maryland, in the suburbs around there. And so we just need to allow these folks to have some kind of incidental benefit because they're going to have two places they need to have. They need an apartment, they need a home in two places to comply with the statute and to do the job. So I think it's just trying to be a common sense. Don't put ourselves, step on our own necktie, and we're trying to get the right people to run and work for us in the Capitol. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Questions sponsored. Senator Ellis.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just trying to do a quick search on the internet to make sure that we've got capital versus capital right. I think the A serves as the seat of a country's or a state government. Capitol with an O is a building in which the legislative body meets. So I think capital could actually work if that's the intention. I don't think it's the actual physical place of the United States Capitol building that maybe the good senator who brought this amendment is trying to describe. Maybe it is the District of Columbia, which could include areas near in Virginia or Maryland. So maybe we can get this sorted out now without needing an amendment.
Right. That's, you're absolutely correct. In my old newspaper days. Yeah. My old newspaper days, I was corrected on the A and the O.
Actually, I meant it to be the other one, but
Okay.
whatever.
Further questions for the sponsor? Question on the amendment. This is second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 163. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The amendment has passed. We're back on the bill 163. House Bill 163 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 166, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 166, Utilities Presumption Against Early Facility Retirements.
There are no amendments. House Bill 166 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 170, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 170, Wyoming Economic Development Zones.
House Bill 170 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 187, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 187, Elected Official Residency Requirement.
There are no amendments. House Bill 187 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 189.
House Bill 189, Mine Product Taxes for Natural Gas Consumed on Site.
There are no amendments. House Bill 189 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 236, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 236, Firearms Transactions, Financial Discrimination.
There are amendments. Read in the first amendment.
House Bill 236, second reading amendment number 1 to engrossed copy, page 5, line 14, delete.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 236, senators, and ask for your favorable consideration. What this amendment does, good senators, is it allows for the financial institutions to create a policy affirming their statement that they won't discriminate against the firearms industry. And if so, the act does not apply. It's a good little amendment. Ask for your favorable consideration.
Questions on the amendment discussion? Question on the amendment discussion? All those in favor of the second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 236, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The amendment has passed. Reading the second amendment.
House Bill 236, second reading amendment number 2 to engrossed copy, page 1 above line 1 in.
Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would move second reading amendment number 2 to House Bill 236 and ask for your favorable consideration. The bill as it is drafted is about the Second Amendment and our right to have firearms, Mr. President. But I also, I'm concerned about the First Amendment and I'm concerned about the Third Amendment. And it puts me in a quandary here and I'm scratching my head and thinking about this. But the Third Amendment is very important and it rarely gets any attention. And this is the amendment about quartering soldiers in people's homes. This was very important to our founders. And I realize that that is something abhorrent to all of us. That's where this First Amendment comes in, Mr. President, because people are allowed to propose the quartering of soldiers in people's homes. But and that should not be a reason to be denied banking. And so what this does, Mr. President, is as is necessary, bringing attention to our Third Amendment about quartering of soldiers, which is permitted in wartime, but we're at peace, I think, I'm not sure. But, and also maintaining free speech so that you can advocate for something but not implement something and still receive banking services in this great state of Wyoming. And I want to make sure that that happens. And Mr. President, this amendment is brought in jest somewhat, but it draws a point about the importance. You know, business appeals to all people. It's a great equalizer. We don't need, if we're trying to recruit firearms companies in Wyoming, our banks will serve them. I guarantee you. We don't need this bill. If we're trying to chase people away, Mr. President, then we need a bill like this because all they'll read about is how Wyoming has kind of gone off the deep end on restricting the way that people can think and do business. And I would withdraw the amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Absent objection, the amendment has been withdrawn. All right. We are back on the bill. Oh, Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, maybe a point of order. The previous speaker said we are at peace. We are not at peace, Mr. President. We are at war, longest war that we've had, the war on terror. Our soldiers are deployed all over the Middle East and elsewhere, and we are a country at war. Thank you.
Thank you for that point. Thank you. Okay, we are back on the bill. House Bill 236 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Absent hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 239, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 239, workers' compensation, student learner agreements.
There are no amendments. House Bill 239 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 253, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 253, higher education ban on funding for abortions.
There is an amendment. Please read in the amendment.
House Bill 253, second reading amendment number 1 to engrossed copy, page 2, line 6 after.
Senator Perkins.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. A little bit reluctantly, I stand up and I move second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 253 and ask the body to vote aye. Mr. Chairman, if we look at the bill as it's written, what we have is this goes in and the best place I can give you the example of how this works. It does it once for university and then once for community colleges. But it basically, if you go to line 7, you delete what it does is it would the amendment and you feather it in, would simply say that the University of Wyoming shall not expend any 6 and 7, line 6 and 7. The University of Wyoming shall not expend any general funds under any general funds for, and then leaves the rest. That's what it does. So it strikes federal funds and or other funds under its control and just limits its general funds. Mr. President, members of the Senate, why this is important for a couple of reasons. One is the University of Wyoming, while we refer to it as a state agency, is not a state agency. I would refer you to the Wyoming Constitution, Article 7, sections 15 and 17. First, in Article 15 of Article 7, Section 15 of the Wyoming Constitution establishes the University of Wyoming and confirms that state institution with the several departments considered by declared to be the University of Wyoming. And then it grants all of its property shall vest in the university and be exclusively used for the purposes which they are granted, donated, or devised. And so donated or devised, keep that in mind. Said land shall may be leased on terms approved by land commissioner, so on and so forth. Then you go to section 17 and it says the legislature shall provide by law for the management of the university and its lands and other property by a board of trustees. So this is not the University of Wyoming is not just, it's a state institution. It's not an agency. It's called out in here and it requires the management is delegated essentially to the board of trustees. What does this do? This does a couple of things. The reason I bring up some of that devised is what we're having is we're trying to control federal funds. We've already talked about the fact yesterday that federal funds already have this general prohibition on it, but we look at other funds under its control. Mr. President, those are devised funds. That can be from tuition, that can be from donors, that can be from research grants, that can be from all other kinds of sources, and yet we're trying to control and manage that property of the university when the Constitution says, Wyoming Constitution says that the Board of Trustees gets to do that. We certainly can do that and put a condition upon our devise, our gift or donation of general funds, but I do not think that we have the right to instruct the university who has control of those funds, what they do with the other funds and the conditions of their devise. For example, if someone wanted to donate and they would say that you had a private donor who wanted to donate to pay all the student athletes medical care or their, not medical care, but their health insurance policies. And they didn't have those conditions on it. And then we put this condition on it. We're putting a condition on that devise that they can't use it for that. I think the Constitution prohibits that. The other thing that the other place I'd refer you to is in Article 1 of the Wyoming Constitution, Section 38, regarding right of healthcare access. That gives any, in Section 38, Article B or subsection B says any person may pay a healthcare provider may accept direct payment from healthcare without imposition of penalties or fines for doing so. Article subsection A gives each competent adult has the right to make his or her own healthcare decisions. Parents and guardians have the right to make decisions for their kids or the people under their care. And it restricts the legislature to only determine reasonable and necessary restrictions on rights granted under this section. We're now talking about your right you're commanding the university to deny anyone the ability to buy a health insurance policy that has these in it, because even if it's a pass-through account, even if they collect the money and turn around and pay it, it's under the control of the university. This is government overreach in its biggest sense. The other reason you have to is we also know from the United States Supreme Court in political cases, which is this also, that we have a First Amendment right under the Bill of Rights for freedom of speech. And the way that we spend oftentimes our money is freedom of speech. And when we impose these restrictions on other people's money, we're restricting that right of free speech, particularly with private donors. This goes too far. And with this amendment, simply comes back and pulls it back to what we have the right to. We have every right. Say, you may not use these general funds for these purposes. That's fair. But to be overreaching like this is not only unfair, it's unconstitutional. I ask you to vote aye on the amendment.
Further discussion, Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, on and against the amendment, and let's talk about the Constitution. And so if you go to Article 7, Section 15, if you take a very broad interpretation of it, then you would say, well, then my good chairman is correct. But it's not broad because it's not ambiguous. The language is clear. And it says, in the aid of instruction to be given to any departments with all other grants, donations, or devices to the university shall be vested strictly in the university. In the aid of instruction. The Constitution is silent on whether we incorporate healthcare. It doesn't say in here that if somebody donates for the purposes of healthcare to the university, that that's protected under the Constitution. The statute is not ambiguous. It is clear, specific to instruction. This doesn't deal with instruction. This deals with health issues for students at the University of Wyoming. I would disagree wholeheartedly that this does not apply, Mr. Chairman. The way I read it, it's not ambiguous. It's clear. That provision only applies to donations for the instructions of students at the university. On and against the amendment.
Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and against the amendment. This is a policy decision of what we do with money, public money. The example that I heard against this amendment was talking about private funds. Nobody's saying they can't do what they want to do with private funds. This is a policy decision of what we're doing with money. And the arguments in committee was that it wasn't even used much. So I don't think there's a big problem here. We're going to set a precedent that it's not used at all.
Senator Nethercott.
Mr. Chairman, or Mr. President, thank you. Just a question about what didn't have the benefit of committee, but what wasn't used much? What exactly are we talking about? Another piece is that this legislation, I think, applies broader than just to the university. It applies to all institutions of higher education. There's additional concerns regarding insurance coverage that's available and insurance coverage that may be required to be provided to certain students, particularly student athletes. It isn't regarding the policy statement. It's about the pragmatic effects of the desire for the policy statement, which I certainly understand. But it's not as simple as right or wrong or policy statements. There actually are practical challenges associated with what you're doing or what you're wanting to do. I know it seems very simple and we want it to be simple, but it is not. So I urge great consideration, and I appreciate the Chairman of Appropriations' effort to fix it, regardless of the effort to simplify the policy statement when it is not.
Further discussion, Senator Scott, and then we'll come up to Senator Beitman.
Mr. President, on and for and trying to answer the question on the issue of just instruction. I would respond in two ways to that. First, where you're talking about health insurance, I think you're also talking about, I think in some cases the health insurance goes to instructors, particularly graduate students who are instructing, and that distinctly is keeping them healthy so they can instruct. And it also goes to the students because you want to keep them healthy and in the classroom. So, Mr. Chairman, I think that particular provision is being misread. I think you have to read the whole paragraph, and just saying that the university's ability to manage is confined strictly to instruction is way too narrow a reading of this particular provision of the Constitution.
Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and against the amendment. The whole point of this bill is to prohibit public funds from being used for abortions. Public funds are fungible. And what we're seeing at the university is private funds, federal funds, state funds being commingled to be used for a multitude of reasons. I've seen where they've actually donated to a political party. How is that legal? Well, we're going to look into that. I don't think it is. If in the argument, oh, the donor wants to earmark certain money for certain things, I think we'd have a problem if a donor wanted private funds to be used to set up a white supremacist organization on the campus. I think the legislature would want to have a say in something like that. It's a moral issue. This is a moral issue. And if we're going to wave the Constitution around, I would like to point out Article 1, Section 2, equality of all and their inherent right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All members of the human race are equal. That's our job, ladies and gentlemen, to protect that right to life and not subsidize or directly support abortions. Thank you.
Further discussion on the amendment, Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and for the amendment, I think when you say any appropriated general funds, you achieve your desired outcome without tying the university up in potential legal jeopardy with respect to federal funds or something that was donated by a private donor. Because when you say any, we all know that they can't parse their money out that closely. Every position there is partially funded from this, partially funded from that. And so to the extent that they had a university health center, I don't know that they do. When I was in college, they did. That's going to be at least partially funded by general fund money, and this would apply to that. And then the health insurance policy, again, I don't know what they do at UW. I know what was true when I was an undergraduate and my 3 kids, when they went to school, the school said, buy this health insurance policy that we know will at least give you some minimal level of coverage while you're here, or show us you have some other health insurance. And they do that as a defensive gesture, because if something happens to you while you're in college, they got to take care of you. So they just want to know you got a health insurance policy. Well, so the people on the payroll at the university that pick the policy and print the materials about the policy and set the procedures about the policy, any one or all of them are going to be at least partially paid for by general fund money, and they're prohibited from participating in any way in the selection of or promotion or dissemination of a health insurance policy that promotes abortion or pays for abortion. So I think what you do is you achieve the desired effect with the amendment. It's simpler, it's cleaner, and it avoids just the university being tied up in complete legal knots over the private funds they receive and the federal funds they receive. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion on the amendment, Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, real curious from my colleague from Natrona County, because I think he may be right under a general grant for research, because the way it reads in the Constitution, it says used for the purpose for which they were granted, donated, or devised. So if a donor come in and they donated a significant amount of money for research, and as part of that research includes the stipends for your graduate student that might have some healthcare provision in that stipend, I wouldn't argue that my colleague's not correct. But I think what we're trying to get at here is the way this reads in the Constitution. If somebody come in and they wanted to donate specifically to set up a fund at the University of Wyoming to provide abortion for students on the campus, specifically for students. Right here, it says that's because now we're not talking about the instruction of my colleague. We're talking about healthcare. We're talking about health decisions. I think that's what we're trying to get at with the amendment, to say if somebody wants to come in and donate money, if we preclude this, precluded under federal law, precluded under with the state law for the general funds. But what would preclude somebody from coming in because they wanted to force an issue and say, we're going to donate a significant amount of money to the university for any student that wants to get an abortion. That's what we're trying to get at, Mr. President. Because the way this reads in the Constitution, the university would be obligated to provide that services for the specific purpose of what that grant was given to the university for. And I think that's the issue that we're trying to grapple with. Now, maybe this is the blunt instrument to try to accomplish that. But specifically, I think that's the issue that we're trying to deal with. But I'm curious if my colleague from Natrona County would interpret that the same way as he did with the discussion about a donation for a research grant that may include some other component of that. That's the way I read the Constitution. And I think that's the intent of what we're trying to get to with the bill.
Let's go to Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. President. A number of points that have been made were the ones that I was going to actually comment on. And I appreciate the past speaker. I am against this amendment. And I don't think it serves any purpose for those of us who have a different view on the life issue. Thank you.
Further discussion on the amendment. Let's go to Senator Wasberger and then back to Senator Hutchings.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. As we look at our Constitution, in 2011, this legislative body passed Section 38, right of healthcare access, which was voted on by the people affirmatively and put into effect November 14th, 2012. And essentially, Section 38, right of healthcare access, Section A, each competent adult shall have the right to make his or her own healthcare decisions. The parent, guardian, or legal representative of any other natural person shall have the right to make healthcare decisions for that person. And then it goes on from there. It does say that the legislature under this section can protect the health and general welfare of the people or to accomplish other purposes set forth in the Wyoming Constitution. And in Section D, it states, the state of Wyoming shall act to preserve these rights from undue governmental infringement. And so it appears to me, although I don't believe that this Section 38 has ever been determined in a court of law, but it says to me that each competent adult shall have the right to make his or her own healthcare decisions. And so if this is going to be used by others to be stated that I have the right to wear a mask or I don't wear a mask, then I think it goes further than that. It gives people the right to make their own choice. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. President. What it doesn't say in Article 1, Section 38 is that you have a right to use government money to make your own choices. That's what this is about. We keep coming back to these other ideas. This is simple, folks. This is government money. It's like, no, we have a choice. We have a right to say, no, you're not going to use government money for that. Nobody's saying they can't make their own choices. They can do whatever they want. Use their money. Call daddy, call mommy, call whoever. But don't use government money.
Further discussion. Let's go to Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully we'll put it into the discussion and get on to the vote. I want to thank those who spoke on and against this amendment. I think the amendment clouds it in the conversation, clouds what the bill is doing, and those that are against the amendment made it very clear that we're talking about abortion. We're talking about anybody using government funds to pay for abortion should be against the law. And we're trying to codify that. This body voted for this last year in a budget amendment. They passed this out. And we're just trying to put it into law. And it's so simple. If the government puts, the state or the federal government puts money in one pocket and someone donates money in another pocket, me as a university or the community college using any of those funds to fund elective abortions should be against the law. This amendment doesn't do anything to prevent the universities from being used as a funnel for this purpose. So on and against the amendment and for the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We have further discussion before we go back to the sponsor. We'll go back to Senator Perkins now.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. I think it's a good discussion. This is a hard one. I voted for that budget amendment last year, and let me tell you the difference between the budget amendment last year and this bill. That budget amendment last year related to appropriations of this body to the university. This bill goes much, much further. If you, again, you go to, on this bill, on line 7 to 6, the university says says as a condition, so go back and read the whole first on line 4, as a condition of receiving or expending any monies or funds appropriated to the University of Wyoming. So on a condition of us giving them, which are usually with very few exceptions, other than some construction dollars that maybe come from SIPA, this general fund, the block grant to the University of Wyoming comes from general fund. So as a condition of receiving that, then the University of Wyoming shall not expend any general funds. Fair enough. Again, that's general funds. Federal funds, you can put that in or take it out. Ultimately, I don't know that we have any control over the federal funds. The feds are going to control their conditions. But then it says other funds under its control. I had a conversation last night with the prime sponsor of this bill and with some other members who are sponsors in this House. And we were trying to get to the talk about this very issue, other funds. Ask the question. So if there's a pass-through account, so if they're coming, if these students are applying for medical and health insurance and the health insurance, what doesn't specifically call it out, may provide for the ability for someone to get an abortion, but they're collecting funds from which they're going to pay. And most of us who've been to college know about these cheap medical policies that they offer, and oftentimes you buy them up. But if it's just a pass-through account, so they're supposed to take the money and collect it from the students, turn around and pay the premium on the just into that pass-through account. That's now under the control of the university? Is that included in this amendment? The answer was yes. Once they have it, it's under their control and they can't use it. Go back to the other devices. We're saying that it's not just public, but I have no problem. And in fact, I support not using general fund or other funds appropriated from this body, from this state, the university for those purposes. I support that. What I don't support is saying that once it's in their control from whatever other source, for whatever other purpose, that we have the right to designate in this bill what happens, because it's more than just don't use public funds for abortion. I support that proposition. I don't support the overreach of the government to say, not only that, you can't use any money from any source to do that. Going back, so I think that's a substantial difference. Going back, and I think it was directed to the other senator from Natrona County, but going back to the specific question directed back to the Natrona County, I agree with that general proposition. I think that the Constitution is clear when you devise it with those conditions. If it's accepted, they have an obligation under the Constitution, they being the University of Wyoming, to use it in accordance with the conditions under which it was devised or given. I agree with that wholeheartedly. What would we do if someone donated and said, we want a free all access abortion clinic on the University of Wyoming and use that money for that? If the university accepted that, we have every right to come back down here and say, you know what, we're not giving you general fund money anymore. We have every right to do that. I don't think we have the right to come back in and say, sorry, university, you can't accept that. We certainly have the right to control the donations and the money, the public money, the tax money that we appropriate to the university. We have every right to control that. Ultimately, this amendment simply comes back and makes it down so it just limits this to general funds. If we wanted to do on third reading, come back and make public funds of the state or something like that, I'm all for that. But I really don't think we have the right to control the funds that come from other sources, private or even other agency, not other agency, anything under the state of the government we have that's the government's contributing from us, we certainly have the right to control. I think this just goes too far. Thank you, Mr. President. On and for the amendment.
Ready for the question? Question on the amendment. This is second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 253. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. No. Chairs in doubt. Those in favor stand. 14, those opposed, stand. Fourteen, yes, aye, 13, no. Amendment is passed. We're back on the bill. House Bill 253, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Joint Resolution 13, second reading of the joint resolution.
House Joint Resolution 13, support of Taiwan.
Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to make a brief statement about this joint resolution. I believe that this joint resolution on foreign policy and economic relations are very much germane to this state legislature. I noticed in section 3, the historic diplomatic efforts to recognize Taiwan, which I fully support. Equally germane, however, are joint resolutions on economic boycotts on the state of Israel and the historic plight of the people of Armenia in 1915 and their recognition of that tragedy. So today I fully support this joint resolution. When I was in the other body some years ago, some of the other issues of joint resolutions that I just brought up, I was repeatedly told were not germane or of interest to the state legislature, which I think is completely wrong. And that's why I fully support this joint resolution, as well as other issues that I just mentioned. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. House Joint Resolution 13, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 127, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 127, public health amendments.
There is an amendment, Senator McEwen.
Could I have the amendment read in, Mr. President?
House Bill 127, second reading amendment number 1 to an engrossed copy, page 5, line 23 in.
Thank you, Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. President. As somebody pointed out, it may not be that short of an amendment, but it's very simple. It's just the language out of Senate File 80 going back into the bill, which allows us to convene via Zoom or electronically if the need arises. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Questions on the amendment? This is second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 127. Questions, discussion? Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's kind of a shorter version of what we discussed yesterday. And Mr. President, we can't imagine a situation where the legislature would be involved in this. We're policymakers. We're not executive decision makers. It's just bad policy in general to storm down here and upset the apple cart, but we do have the ability to call ourselves in should we need to. That's something we will exercise at the time with the facts that we have at the time. To presuppose that the legislature is going to have their thumb on top of what the executive branch health decisions are, I think sets up a bit of tension and a bit of improper influence on both branches of government, Mr. President. And the practicality of it escapes me. I don't know about you guys. When this hit last year, I left here on a Friday. It's a Friday today. And I went home and I laid off 28 people the following Tuesday as things came down. I was trying to keep my head above water, trying to work within the community. I'm not sure I had a way figured out to find a path to decide whether what was happening was right or wrong and come down here within a short amount of time and be part of a special session to override what was happening. You know, there undoubtedly were mistakes and undoubtedly things could be done better, but we're going to look back on this and we're going to decide that we got through it and we made our laws better because of it. But having us all in our communities at the coffee shops get all mad maybe we're wearing masks and maybe we don't have coffee shops anymore, and then storm down here to undo something when the information just isn't in, is really, really bad policy and could endanger the health of our citizenry. We don't always get it right. We can be a bit more reactionary than the folks in power, actually, if you want to know the truth. I suggest we defeat this amendment.
Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Honored for the amendment, and I'd just like to remind the body that we are on our 24th continuation of the statewide public health order. A lot different than 2 weeks to flatten the curve. 24th continuation, and we have a public that is growing very tired of this, and they expect their elected representatives closest to them to do something about it, or at least have the ability to do something about it. We may not choose to act if the information is such that warrants a continuation of these health orders, but we need to hold that authority to do something when it does not. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion on the amendment, Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and for the amendment. I went through my district one weekend and just all the businesses that were open. I drove down the street and I went in and talked to some of the business owners, and they were all for this type of legislation. And they wish they had had an opportunity to know when and how to come down and speak before the legislature on this. I spoke to a gentleman just last weekend and he said, my business was devastated because of these closures. So just want to let you know, if you have an opportunity, well, I guess you really don't because today's the last day, but just know there are people out there that are suffering and would have liked to have had some input. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion, Senator Scott.
Mr. President, let's stick to the specifics of this amendment. My instinct when I first read the amendment was that it made a very bad bill just a little less bad, and that we therefore ought to adopt it. But I have a question on the amendment itself. It essentially sets some rules for how the legislature is going to proceed. Now, if we come down here and if the special session is one called by the governor, my understanding, it was clear that we could do what we did and operate virtually. I was told at the time that the constitutional provision for us calling ourselves in session requires that we come down here and doesn't allow for the virtual. And is this trying to do by amendment something we really can't do because of the particularities of the way the Constitution works when we call ourselves in? And I'm not sure about that and would like some discussion on that point. I think, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, some of the other debate was on the virtues or lack thereof of the bill. And I think we need to look at the amendment specifically.
Discussion, Senator Kinski.
Mr. President, to pick up where my friend from Bates Creek left off, I think this amendment makes a good bill a little bit gooder. So you are correct. The Constitution says that we're to meet in the seat of government. And you're also correct that we had an interpretation from our attorneys that says that means we need to be physically right here. So there is a question as to whether, if somebody sued and it got to the Wyoming Supreme Court, whether they'd say this violates the Constitution. And probably that would prevail if we routinely met remotely. But when it's calling out a public health emergency, I suspect that on balance, the Supreme Court would probably uphold this language, allowing us to meet remotely given the exigencies of the circumstance. So I think it's a necessary amendment. In the midst of a pandemic, we may not be able to get down here, but I think to maintain a constitutional public health order, as I mentioned in when we discussed the other bill in the committee of the whole, there was a state Supreme Court that struck down an order not too different from ours, and rightfully so, saying the executive executes, but it's up to the legislature to pass the laws. And when the legislature allows, when there's a law in the books, it just allows an order to be extended indefinitely, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, a year. It's an impermissible delegation of authority, and they struck down the law. And so I think having this 60-day review means that we will have on the books a constitutional pandemic law. I think it's necessary and on and for the amendment.
For discussion on the amendment, further discussion, Senator Case.
Mr. President, I'm thinking of the circumstances that would cause this to happen. It'd be a real conflict between the executive branch and the legislative branch, because it would be an executive order that we'd be overturning. So in that situation, I'm not so sure that I could predict how the court would rule. This is not on firm constitutional ground. And if we wanted to, we really need to fix the Constitution with respect to the legislature's ability to call ourselves into session at a location outside of Cheyenne. And tangling it all up into this and setting up a horrendous conflict. And then it's expecting the courts to rule it one way or the other. It could be just a big mess, creating a whole bunch of uncertainty at a crisis in our government and our public health. Is that really what we want to do?
Further discussion before we go back to the sponsor. Any further questions or discussion? Let's go back to Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a few notes. I think it's really critical from what I'm hearing for all of us to back up and realize one thing. We work for our constituents. They're our boss. The governor's not our boss. The people who elected us here. And as far as rules, I love that argument too. We change the rules all the time to fit the situation. We don't like this bill, so we want to talk about rules. The other thing is we are taking local control away from our constituents who are actually on the ground there and know what's going on. And my last thing is the number of businesses that went out of business over this because they were small businesses was huge. My cousin lost her business. I know 4 people in Gillette that lost businesses, but you could go to some of the big stores and buy everything there because evidently if you had a mask on and you were in a big corporate store, which enjoyed huge record profits, the COVID wouldn't get you. But if you went to somebody's small store to get a piece of furniture or clothing, that was deadly. So yes, this was not handled very well. This is not an attack on the executive branch. This is trying to fix policy in a manner that will allow us to help our constituents out. So I would ask for your positive support and thank you, Mr. President.
Call the question. All those in favor of second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 127, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The amendment has passed. We're back on the bill. House Bill 127 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, do you have a consent list? With that order of business for 3rd readings and final passage.
Mr. President, we do. I move the 3rd reading consent list, which is as follows. House Bill 36, Management Council membership. House Bill 156, alcohol beverage permits. House Bill 190, vehicles titles for non-resident owners. House Bill 244, State Investment Administration. House Bill 254, Transportation Computer System. House Journal 11, State Sovereignty and Impacted by Federal Actions.
Okay, just confirming, Senator, House Bill 135, that was on my consent list. Are you removing that? House Bill 135 is on,
No, it'll stay and go to his.
it's on third reading consent list. Okay, I need you to just read that in as well on this consent list, sir. You didn't include that on the list you gave me, 135. So could you just read that in as well? And it's part of the consent list.
Mr. Chairman, I move third reading consent list,
Including-
include House Bill 135, Hanco Leadership Highway designation.
Thank you. Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, I would ask that House Bill 135, Hank Co-Leadership Highway designation be removed from the consent list.
Changes that fast. Absent objection, it has been removed. All right. Would anybody else like any of these other bills removed from the consent list? Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? House Bill 36, Management Council Membership. House Bill 156, Alcoholic Beverage Permits. House Bill 190, Vehicle Titles for Non-Resident Owners. House Bill 244, State Investment Administration. House Bill 254, Transportation Computer System. House Joint Resolution 11, State Sovereignty Impacted by Federal Actions. Chief Clerk, call the roll.
On the consent list, roll call. Anderson. Baldwin. Beitman. Boner excused. Bouchard. Case. Cooper. Driscoll. Ellis. French. Murphy. Guru. Hicks.
Aye.
Hutchings. James. Kinsky.
Aye.
Kolb. Cost. Landon. McCune. Nethercott. Pappas. Perkins. Rothfuss. Salazar. Schuler. Scott. Steinmetz. Wasserberger. President Dockstader. On the consent list, 29 aye, 1 excused. House Bill 36, are there any changes? Rothfuss, aye to no. Guru, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing vote closed. House Bill 36, 27 aye, 2 no, 1 excused. House Bill 156, are there any changes? Ellis, no. Steinmetz, no. Case, no. Ellis, no to aye. Closing vote. Closing vote closed. House Bill 156, 27 aye, 2 no, 1 excused. House Bill 190, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing vote closed. House Bill 190, 29 aye, 1 excused. House Bill 244, are there any changes? James? Aye to no. Bouchard, aye to no. French, aye to no. Rothfuss, aye to no. McEwen, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing vote closed. House Bill 244, 24 aye, 5 no, 1 excused. House Bill 254, are there any changes? Case, aye to no. Hicks? I to no. Kolb, I to no. Steinmetz, no. Closing vote. Closing vote closed. House Bill 254, 25 aye, 4 no, and 1 excused. House Joint Resolution 11, are there any changes? Perkins, no. Rothfuss, no. Case, no. Closing vote. Closing vote closed. House Joint Resolution 11, 26 aye, 3 no, and 1 excused.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, House Bill 36, Management Council membership, House Bill 156, alcoholic beverage permits, House Bill 190, vehicle titles for non-resident owners, House Bill 244, State Investment Administration, House Bill 254, Transportation Computer System, and House Joint Resolution 11, State Sovereignty Impacted by Federal Actions, have passed the Senate. Bills on third reading, we'll take them in numerical order. We'll start with House Bill 135. House Bill 135, third reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 135, Hank Co. Leadership Highway Designation, sponsored by Representative Henderson, an act relating to highways.
For the record, it is House Bill 135. Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, the reason I pulled this off was I want to explain to the body why I'm going to be a no vote on this bill. And it's difficult, Mr. President, but I sit here and our colleague that passed this last year, tremendous leader. I have an ultimate amount of respect for the man. But Mr. President, in the short time that I've been here, I had another gentleman that used to sit in this desk right here. Senator John Schiffer, who I thought was a paragon, was a tremendous leader, a mentor. Well, we didn't come in and nominate a highway for him, Mr. President. In fact, our good colleague that used to sit right there in that corner didn't bring a bill to say to recognize the leadership of that man. Mr. Chairman, I walk these halls every day, and I walk Mr. President, there's over 5,000 people, pictures hanging, and I look at those and I say, who were the leaders in those times? And why didn't we name a highway off after them, Mr. President? I walk past the picture of our colleague, Hank Co. every day. Is it not enough? Is it not enough that he graces the halls of the Wyoming Capitol as president of the Senate, as a member that sat here for decades? And how about all those other members that provided that leadership? This is not a vote against Hank Co. It's a vote for Hank Co., Mr. President. I sit here and I've contemplated this, and I thought all the time that Senator Co. sit in that corner in the 11 years that I was here, not once did he bring a bill to recognize all the colleagues and all the people that he had sit with to name a highway. And I sit here today and I have to ask myself, if Senator Co. could weigh in on this debate, would he say, I want you to name a highway after me, Mr. President? We carry Hank Coe in our heart, in our minds. He graces the capital of the state of Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, I think that's a hell of a tribute. I think if we go down this road, every road in the state of Wyoming is going to be named after somebody. And my guess is that if we're going to do a memorial to Hank Coe, we would raise the speed limit to 100 miles an hour, Mr. President, on and against the bill.
Further discussion? Question. Question being called on House Bill 135, House Bill 135 having been read 3 separate times. The question is, shall the bill pass? The chief clerk will call the roll.
House Bill 135, roll call. Anderson. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Beitman. Aye. Boner excused. Bouchard. No. Case. No. Cooper. No. Driscoll. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. Aye. Furphy. No. Guru. No. Hicks.
No.
No. Hutchings. No. James. No. Kinsky.
No.
No. Cole. No. Cost. Aye. Landon. Aye. McEwen. No. Nethercott. No. Pappas. Aye. Perkins. No. Rothfuss. Aye. Salazar. Aye. Schuler. Aye. Scott. No. Steinmetz. No. Wasserberger. No. President Dockstetter. No. Closing vote. Closing vote close. House Bill 135, 12 ayes, 17 noes, 1 excused.
House Bill 135, having failed to receive the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, House Bill 135 has failed to pass the Senate. Senator Landon,
Mr. President, may I have privilege of the floor, please?
please do. Yes.
Thank you. Mr. President, I think our colleague that we lost this past year would be just fine with. You know, it gave us a moment to kind of remember a great career here in the Senate, and my good friend from Bags is right. There's plenty of tribute here, and there'll be some tributes up in his home county. That was a bill that kind of originated up there, and it's all good. I just wanted to throw that out, and thank you for bringing the bill because it gave us an opportunity to remember a really good senator. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Continuing in numerical order on third readings. House Bill 173 for third reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 173, School Finance Funding 2, sponsored by the House Education Committee, an act relating to school finance.
There are amendments. Please read in the first amendment.
House Bill 173, third reading amendment number 1 to engrossed copy, page 48 after line 12, delete.
Senator Wasserberger.
Mr. President, I move third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 173. Mr. Chairman, what this amendment does. I withdraw.
Would you like a moment and just lay it back, sir? Floor Leader Driscoll,
Can we stand at ease for 5 minutes?
let's do that. Stand at ease,
Thank
little
you.
break. Stand at ease till the sound of the gavel, folks. Folks, work your way back to your desk. And before you sit down and before I kind of gavel it back in, folks, have your attention, please. Folks, hey, senators, thank you. Before I gavel this, we're going to do a little exception in thirds. We got someone that would like to just do a quick privilege of the floor, and then I'll hit the gavel that actually puts us in order. Senator Ellis, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've, as you know, got our spring break this week in Cheyenne. And so we have a couple of students up in the gallery who have been waiting very patiently. And so I just want to acknowledge up here, we have Adeline Harpstreet. She's with her mom today, and you'll know her mom works for the Wyoming Taxpayers Association. Adeline is a 6th grade student at Prairie Wind Elementary. And we also have Brendan Detai with his dad, Travis Detai, who's with the Wyoming Mining Association. Brendan is a 6th grader student at St. Mary's. And I just think it's really cool that you're able to visit with us and watch us do our work today. So please, let's welcome our young visitors to the chamber.
Welcome to the Senate. We'll give you some frontline education here today.
Oh boy.
Enjoy it. Thank you. All right, let me gavel back in. Let's go to work. Senate, come back to order. We are on third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 173. Senator Wasberger.
Move third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 173 and ask for your favorable vote. Members of the Senate, essentially what this does is it takes out the categorical grant on teacher salaries and replaces it back into the model as a block grant to the school districts. Members of the legislature, I passed out a 3-sheet handout to you dealing with teacher salaries and what those teacher salaries look like. On the very first page, if you go to the very first column all the way to the right, the average teacher salary, beginning teacher salary in the model is $37,819. And if you turn to the next page, you can see the historical precedents all the way back to 2006. And of course, the same number in the last year. But what I really want to point out to you is on the very last page, with the starting teacher salaries within the model at $37,819, I believe that every district in the state has a higher salary, starting salary, than what's in the model. And so it costs districts literally right at around $10,000 per starting teacher more than what's in the model. And so the problem with the categorical grant, at least over the years with dealing with the federal government, and actually this started back actually with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, I believe of 1965. And Congress, I think, has dealt with the strings that they have attached to that funding. And we have created a lot of different titles as a result of that. Title I, Title II, which is professional development, Perkins grant money, those types of things. And always trying to deal with that money it can be very difficult because the strings are attached. And my worry is that we're going to attach strings to teacher salaries, which quite frankly is the biggest, most expensive thing in the model. 85% of a school district's cost is in salaries. And so I truly believe that we're walking down a road that is the wrong way to go. And I think we are dangerously stepping on local control and moving towards a state school board here in this body and across the hall. And so I would ask for your favorable vote to put this back into a block grant to the districts and to allow for local control in the biggest item of what takes place in the funding model. Thank you, Mr. President.
Let's go Senator Pipeman, then back to the Chair of Education. Go ahead, Senator Pipeman.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and against the amendment. It's an important piece that I insisted on getting in the bill was, you know, if you vote for this amendment, basically you're putting the teachers on the chopping block first. And if we're going to do any sort of reductions in education funding, we want to make sure that our teachers are protected. And that's why we went out of our way to do the categorical grant and give them a bump in pay to offset what the good senator just described between their lower starting base salaries and what they're actually paying them. So we took this into very thoughtful consideration. That's why we wanted to do the categorical grant. So vote against this and protect the teachers. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Scott, I want to hold you back just a little bit because you're the catch net here. So we're going to go back to Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have a question about the amendment and those that follow can answer this. So I understand that we're talking that the chart we've talked about is starting salaries, but we passed an amendment on the bill in I think it was committee, the standing anyway, it was standing committee and amendment. Then I think we corrected it later on, but my recollection is that the salary model in the model as the bill as stands now is 41,000, somewhere between 41 and $42,000, and was the amount that was in the model. So for those of us who are a little bit not so bright in the school funding model, it might help us understand the difference between, and then there was upgrades for every year of seniority after so many years, and you got more money if you were a master's degree, you got more money if you were a doctorate, and you got more money the longer you had been there. But the model was somewhere in the bill was somewhere between, I think we changed, it was just a hair under 42, and I think it got just pulled back just a nib, like a couple $100. But I'd like to understand how that works and why this is, how teachers, how starting salaries would only be 37.8 when the bill has them would have them in over 41. So thank you.
See if there's any more before we go back to the Chair of Education. Let's go to the Vice Chair of Education, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and against the amendment. We have talked extensively about who might be on the chopping block first if budget reductions were to occur in our school districts. And our concern was that teachers, and particularly popular teachers, would be cut first. In my district, I can tell you that discussions this past winter, our district sent out a survey to teachers asking if they'd be willing to absorb a 10% cut in their salaries. At the same time, we are in the process of hiring a new superintendent. Our outgoing superintendent was one of those making about a $200,000 a year salary. I said, I've sent a letter to my school district and said, is there any way we can realign that offering of what's being posted? I think it was being offered in the $180,000 range. And the short answer I was told was no, we're not going to adjust the superintendent's salary, but we're going to ask our teachers to take these cuts first. And that doesn't set well with me, Mr. President. And I don't know how many of the members are reading their news clippings that are online, but one of them caught my eye that came out just a few days ago. The headline, preparing for budget cuts. The name of the school district, you can go back and look for it, cuts elementary art teachers. This is the very thing we're trying to protect against. We don't want our teachers to be cut first at all. And so we didn't just offer you a categorical grant. We looked at numbers, we did some analysis, and that's why you'll see those budget increases that were prosed in a comprehensive way. So I just want to emphasize that this isn't an unfounded fear. If you go back and read those news clippings, you'll see the article. That's what we were trying to protect against the amendment.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else? We're going to go back to the Chair of Education now and then back to the sponsor of the amendment. Senator Scott, Chairman Scott, go ahead.
Mr. President, for my first time, on and against this amendment. And you've heard from my colleagues on the Education Committee. They're right. What this amendment is seeking to do is to remove the protections we put in for the teachers. And we put those in because we have seen that the instinct has been to, if there's a reduction in education, the very first place that the people running the school district want to take it is out of the teachers. Because the teachers are rightly popular. The public understands that the absolute key workers in this whole business of education are the teachers. So the bureaucratic instinct has been, if there's a reduction proposed, you find a popular teacher and say, we're going to lose that teacher, or we're going to lose that program, not teach to it. What's been happening is that money that the model has provided for teachers there's been a giant slush fund created with the ghost teachers who don't exist. And that slush fund has gone in 3 places. 4 places, really. It's provided money for excessive salaries for administrators, for excessive numbers of administrators. It's provided money for the athletic programs, which are funded well above what the model provides. It has provided money, frankly, for some of the frills we've heard about from our constituents. And it has provided money to pay teachers more than the model is providing. What we're trying to do is protect the teachers. So as the future develops, if we have to make further reductions, and we make some in this bill right down to the level the feds allow if we accept their stimulus, and I think we're going to have to do that. It's practical. But in the future, we're going to have to come back. We're reducing the whole education funding here by about 3%. We want to protect the teachers doing that. We want to protect the teachers in the future. And this is the way we're seeking to do that. They can put money in from the outside to fund teachers. I don't think they're going to need to, but they can if they need to. There's some other provisions that aren't in this amendment that are relevant, Mr. President, that reduce the number of ghost teachers and increase the funding for teachers in the model by 8.8%. That's significant. To try to get the model closer to the reality. But in all this, we need to protect the teachers because they are the absolute key to the success of our schools. And so that's why your Senate Education Committee, majority of the committee, has adopted this strategy of protecting the teachers this way. And I know that some of the other elements in school districts don't like that, but you have to set some priorities, and that's what we're doing. And we're trying to protect the key people here. So for all those reasons, on and against this amendment.
Let's conclude with Senator Wasserberger. Oops, hold it. Before we go back to you, Senator Wasserberger, Senator Rothfuss, thanks for your patience. You're on. Well, it shows green here, so I see
You've
red
got green?
there.
Can you hear?
Let me do it again. There you go.
Apparently I can be heard.
Yeah,
despite-
it works.
Despite the red. Thank you, Mr. President.
Tech
There we
problem.
go. Mr. President, on and for the amendment, but to be clear, I support the intent of the categorical language with the idea that we want to protect the core of our teachers, that is the most important thing. And I agree with that, but I do have concerns, and I think everybody's well aware of the concerns that I have, that it's very challenging to do deep cuts and do them as some type of a la carte menu where we're enforcing certain things that can be cut and certain things that can't, because it denies the complexity of the way the block grant is actually utilized. There are expenses that school districts are required to pay that aren't in the model anywhere. There are insurances that all of them have. There are costs for food programs that all of them use. Many have SROs that are not included in the model. There are just costs that don't show up. The idea that this protects the teachers in some way, and that we've done well by the teachers as we're making draconian cuts into the model, it's just not accurate. It's just not how things are going to play out in the real world, because the complexity of the system is much greater than what we have here in front of us. If we're going to make cuts, and I think everyone knows I don't think we should, but if we're going to make cuts, providing flexibility to the districts to make those cuts is appropriate. The idea that it's somehow helpful and noble for us to bring the model into compliance with the real world really seems contrary to the interest of education. If we want to aspire and if we want to do what's right for the students, we would bring the real world into compliance with the model. Categorically doing that would be just fine. That would be the way to protect the students. But again, it's expensive. That costs money. There's no effort to do that. So, Mr. President, I just want everyone to be aware, there's no protection for the schools. There's no protection in the Senate amendments for the students. We're not protecting them. We're cutting their educational programs significantly, pretty much regardless of which way you go on this budget amendment. But for us to stand here and tell ourselves that, well, we have to reject this amendment because that way we're protecting the kids, it's just not accurate. Everything about 173 is hurting education for the kids. This amendment tries to provide flexibility to school districts, recognizing that they have non-uniform requirements. Non-uniform cuts would go into place without this. The flexibility tries to provide an opportunity for more equity, which is going to be difficult to achieve. So again, it's more complicated. There's no good side to this. If you vote for the amendment, it's not good. If you vote against the amendment, it's not good. All of the options on the table are bad for students, bad for education, bad for the state of Wyoming. The amendment's slightly better, on and for.
Senator Cost, then to Senator Wasberger.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've stated before, and I still stand on the idea that the ghost teachers have always been something that I was bothered by, and that the insurance. And so I think there's a need for us to get that under control. At the same time, I understand the categorical situation, but my only hope is we want to make sure we're protecting teachers. So if the funding is not appropriate for them to be protected, not a raise, but for them to be protected, I hope that there's a provision that they can be put more in from somewhere to protect that. I know that they have the choice to be able to move some from some things, but I want to make sure our teachers are protected. That's the important thing. So whichever way you go, I'm not supporting or not turning down. I'm just saying, protect our teachers. Thank you.
Senator Wassenberger, would you conclude this for us?
Thank you, Mr. President, for my second and final time on and in favor of the amendment. And so the discussion was that we're going to protect teachers. That's a great idea. But the fact of the matter is, with 85% of the budget in people, what that means is the 15% that's left has to be cut, is what we're saying. And so essentially what we're doing is we're going to protect the teachers. And we're going to hammer the kids. We're going to protect the teachers. We're going to hammer the kids. Because what's left is football, basketball, art, chorus, all those things that kids get to do. All state choir, the state art symposium, Skills USA, FBLA, all of those things that keep kids in school will have to be significantly cut to make this go. And so at the risk of protecting teachers, we take away from what the kids love to do. So let's not have state drama. Let's not have all state choir. Let's not have all state band. Those are the things that are left in the budget. We say we want to get excessive salaries under control. But yet we won't consolidate school districts. We have the opportunity to cut half of those high salaries just by consolidating school districts. And so then, in order to balance the budget, we're going to increase class sizes. That hurts large districts. And why do we do that? Because it's like John Dillinger. When he was asked, why does he rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Within 3 districts, you have about 35% of the total students in this state. And I really think that at the end of the day, at least for now, the federal money from the American Rescue Plan is going to save us for a year, and the true cliff comes down the road. And so I'm not so sure that it makes all that much difference. But the idea is the categorical grants, at least to me, are an archaic way of legislating. It's from the 1960s. Most of the time when we deal with categorical grants, the federal government has all kinds of strings attached. And so what we have is we've created the state school board right here in this legislative body, and we've taken away local control. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I call the question.
Question being called. This is on third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 173. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. No. Third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 173 has failed. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, keep moving forward through these amendments. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, you may miss your lunch and somebody will take your lunch.
Mr. Chairman, I
Wait,
moved
just
the committee to hold back leave to rise and said, no, we're not there. I'm sorry. Mr. President, I move we stand recessed until 1:50.
Hold for just one moment. I'm desperately being asked to take care of an enrolled act. Yes, just one enrolled act stands between you and lunch. Enrolled Act number 59, please read it in.
The Senate Enrolled Act number 59 being original Senate file number 25, an act relating to crimes and offenses.
I'm about to sign House or Senate Enrolled Act number 59, original being Senate File 25. I have so signed. Now, Mr. Floor Leader, thank you for your patience.
Until 1:15.
Stand in recess. The motion is, let me check real quick. Any announcements that we need to be aware of? Doesn't look like it. Motion is we stand recess until 1:15. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay.